One of the great things about recording, especially over Wi-Fi or just trying to meet with people in different time zones, is all the fun things that can happen that you never expect. Just like right now when I was getting ready to record this intro, Bruno wanted to let me know that he needed to be a part of this. And despite all of my best attempts, there's simply no way to keep him out of it. So for this introduction, Bruno is with us. And he's an example of the improvisation sometimes you have to use. For my conversation with Rodney Barnes and Selina Espiritu to talk about Quincredible, this amazing graphic novel that they're going to tell you more about in just a moment, we ran into technical difficulties. Selina's Wi-Fi was down. Fiji's in the background scrambling. That's going to happen. And she couldn't stay with us because her cell phone service had reached its capacity for transmitting the video. So she hung up, and thankfully, I pressed on with Rodney Barnes, and even more thankfully, found out from Selina that she was willing to record video answers and submit them to me so that I could do my best to then create some magic, splice the two videos together, and put them into one video for you. Now, interestingly enough, when I completed the audio version, I copy and pasted in one way. When I did this version, I copy and pasted a different way. So actually, if you listen to the podcast and you listen to this video, you're going to hear two very different versions of the same conversation. I'm curious to hear which one you like better. And because I don't know what technical difficulty could pop up next, Bruno and I are going to go ahead and let you get to the conversation and enjoy all of it. Let's simply get right down to it. This is a new episode of Storytelling with Seth, and I am very lucky to be here today with the amazing creative beings who have brought together Quincredible, who put it on the page, who made it a delight for me to read, both for the story and the art. And I'm going to give them both an opportunity to say hello and introduce themselves. I'm actually going to start with Selina first. Selina, hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Selina Espiritu, and I'm the artist for Quincredible, and I'm from the Philippines.
Wonderful. And Rodney, thank you for coming on today.
You're welcome. I'm the author of Quincredible, and I'm here in lovely Los Angeles.
Wonderful. I'm up in San Leandro, just outside of San Francisco and Oakland, little area, the Bay Area that has become my home. And in the attempt to have great lighting at this time of day, I've sequestered into what I hope is the quietest room. It's always an adventure, depending on the time of day. It's always when I least expect it that someone suddenly starts using a weed whacker. So we'll see if that pops up. But what I want to talk to you today about is this story of Quincredible. And I'm going to be honest, I've got a lot of fun questions. I'm looking forward to hearing your answers on it. And if at any point you feel like you're the one who's, I have to give an answer, just pop in there. I might call on one, but if you're like, if I want to just step in there, I'm okay with that. I think it always makes for a bit of fun. I love the passion. And I would love for both of you, if you could, in your own words, describe for me, who is Quinn? And what is the story that he has to tell in the pages of the book that we're talking about, Quincredible?
You want to go first, Selena?
Yeah, sure. Actually, when Quinn was introduced to me, I think his trope is one of my favorites of superheroes, where he's not really that impressive in terms of what he can do. He can't fly, he can't shoot lasers out of his fingers. He's just a kid, and he's just smart, and he has one advantage, and it's that he can't really get hurt. But I like characters like him who they're not reliant on. He doesn't really rely on himself. He over the course of the story, he's had to go around, gain allies, and one of my favorite parts of his character is the relationships that he has in the books. So whenever I get the script and I read it, I really try to
Selena, I think you froze up on us just a little bit.
I Didn't know if that was me.
Focus on each other because I feel like that's just my favorite.
Wonderful.
For me, I look at Quincredible as the average kid who dreams. Um, he gets a modicum of the thing that he dreams about, not exactly the full-on brunt of the dream, but an aspect of it. And I always wanted to write Quinn in such a way that spoke to, as he's developing as a person, he can better utilize the power that he has. And to what Selina was saying as well, I tried to build a lot of his strength as a hero really comes out of the nature of the relationships he has with his parents and his friends. And I wanted to emphasize the strength of community and the need that no matter what your power is, that it's difficult to be an island, that you need strong relationships in order to build a quality life in general, but certainly for the missions, for lack of a better word, that Quinn is on, um, it's all determined on what help, whether it's from Glow, whether it's from Brittany, whether it's from his parents. There's a place that he can go to for strength, the strength that he doesn't have as a superhero, that actually complements the thing that he does that is superhero-ish as far as power is concerned. So I just wanted to try to create a bridge between kids who don't necessarily have like a fancy thing or may see themselves as not having a degree, the confidence that they would like to have, and to understand that in building that confidence, you really bring out whatever strengths you have as a person.
I enjoy that approach because it's a reminder of all the things that we might possess, but if there's something we want that someone else has or can do, and we think to ourselves, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could be just like that? And it causes us to overlook the parts of ourselves that we have already at our disposal, strengths, opportunities. One of the things that always catches my attention is I'm a little over 6 foot, maybe 6'3", and I get a lot of people that are like, "Wow, is it as great to be tall as I think it is?" And I go, "That depends. Have you ever hit your head?" And they sort of pause and look at me, and I go, "Really? Certain restaurants, the lamps that hang over that table, I guarantee you, I've hit that, and it's not as fun as it sounds." And
Well, as a human being who's 6'8", I can certainly relate to your issue. So there you go.
I'm certain that there's certain attributes that we would both see someone with and both consider like, hey, that's a quality I'd like to have, and someone else is going to look at us and go, but you have height. How is it?
Yes.
Now, I love that idea because it's a great reminder for readers and for the development of the character, Quinn, that we get a chance. But I'm also curious because when I was reading over the introduction and just looking at who you both were, I was caught by the fact that also there was a creator by the name of Isaac Reed, who was also involved with Quincredible. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit.
Yeah, I believe that there was another form of Quincredible that came out before our iteration of Quincredible, I think a couple of years before us. And I guess the Lion Forge folks wanted to reboot it or come at it from a different angle or, whatever their motivations were. But when they approached me about writing it, all they said was a kid that's invulnerable.
Okay.
That was it. But yes, sometimes I see art, and I think there was another issue or two that came out before our run started. Some of the names are different, some of the characters are different. It's almost I won't say a different world, but there are elements that are different than what Selina and I have done.
I understand, and I was curious about that because it leads really naturally into my next question, which is, how did you both come to work on this project? I was curious. Just usually, there's always great details about how it is that two people end up working on something together.
Selina?
Well, it sort of just happened because originally Quincredible was the first time I had worked with Lion Forge Only Press. Working with another publisher, and when the person who was handling me and my previous project moved to Lion Forge, I was moved with them. And then as we continued working, the proposal, hey, do you want to work on this song? Coming of age vibes to it, superhero genre. And I said, yeah.
I think you might have froze up on us one more time, Selina.
Yeah, sure,
It's okay.
okay.
It's great dramatic to
And
pause.
then they said that Rodney recognized the name from because he also likes low.
I
think we got you back now.
Yes. Well, for me, I was working on the show Runaways, Marvel's Runaways for Hulu.
Mhm.
And I got a call from one of the editors at Lion Forge who
Hello.
Hi, Selina. Is your audio video sort of delaying you with our conversation at all? Because I want to make sure I'm allowing time if that's happening.
we must be frozen on her side, I guess,
Potentially.
because she just texted us. She said, I believe I've reached the limits.
Oh no. Selina, are we going to lose you? Is the phone or the connection not allowing you to continue, Selina? Give a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you can hear me. Okay. Rodney, I'm happy to continue. Selina,
I'm happy to keep going. I'm good.
Yeah, Selina, I don't want to leave you out. I can do a follow-up with you if you think you have a chance to find a better arrangement for connecting, and I could do a second conversation and try and blend the two together or figure. Okay, I've got it. Yeah, keep going. No problem. Selina, thank you for trying. It was good to meet you for a moment, and please send me an email and I will follow up with you after I'm done talking with Rodney, and hopefully we can create some sort of reconciliation, whatever it might be. Either that, or if you can do hand signals throughout the conversation, that could get really fun too. Okay, Selina. It's okay. Thank you. Thank you. We'll connect after I get off the call with Rodney. Sound good?
It's great seeing you. Thanks, Selina.
Send a quick message. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay, everyone. So sometimes it happens. We're gonna lose Selina for this one, but Rodney and I are gonna continue talking about story, and hopefully I get a chance to follow up with Selina later. Thanks, Selina. Really appreciate it. We're gonna make this finish and work out, however it ends up. Okay.
Hi, I'm Selina Espiritu. I'm from the Philippines, and I am the artist of Quincredible. I handle everything from the layouts to the pencils to the final inks of the project. So Quinn is personally my favorite kind of protagonist. He's mundane, sort of, but he's skilled and he's smart. And there was a lot of emphasis put on his character that it takes more than brawn to solve a problem. So he's a character who's very cerebral. He thinks about what he's going to do, though he might rush into things. And that's the kind of character I like to bring to life, because I feel like there's more to see in yourself of Quinn, because he's just a normal kid, and his character is very much the champion of what is morally right, and he likes to be the champion of those who don't necessarily have the skills that he has because of his enhancement. But he also knows that, or he's also very much aware that there are limits to what he can do. So an important part of his character is also realizing that, hey, you can't always do things on your own. So sometimes it's all right to rely on allies, rely on your friends for, there's strength in numbers, and there's strength when you share your convictions with other people who also have the same passions as you do, and he learns that you're more likely to get something done if you do it together.
Oh man. Well, that seems like a really awesome personality to work with
Yes.
as far as a collaborator. She's
No,
got a
she's
great energy.
fantastic. I mean, I can say it's funny because the first arc, we just communicated through email, and we didn't communicate a lot. I would turn in the scripts, and then when Lion Forge approved them, they would just send them to her, and then Art would come back, and we talk a little bit about edits and notes and thoughts that I had. But her work was so pristine, for lack of a better word. There wasn't really a whole lot that I had to say. It's like she captured the spirit of New Orleans, and she also added like a multicultural quality that I really didn't add to the scripts, but she did it so flawlessly that it felt organic to the world of New Orleans without it feeling forced.
Understood.
I think she really created a great tone. I can't imagine another artist coming in and like doing another arc with that artist and not Selina, because I think we've sort of created a tone that is someone would have to do a different type of story than the type of storytelling we're telling, I think.
I would agree. I mean, I really loved what you were capturing in the story. And one of the things that I was curious about, actually, just one of the many, I'm curious about a lot when I read this story. As I mentioned, it started with the idea of Isaac Reed, the creator. I'm always curious when there's a concept that's been taken in a new direction. So it sounds like Quinn existed in some form prior to. But you were mentioning before we started getting into some distortion, I just want to touch back on that a bit with Selina's video, that you were currently, or at the time, you had been working on Marvel's Runaways.
Yeah, I was working on Marvel's Runaways, and I got a call from one of the Lion Forge editors, and they had read some of my other work for another publisher and dug that and was aware of what Runaways was, and said, we have this young teen of color, and this is what he does. What do you think? Would you like to come on and do it? And for me, I always look at work begets work. The ability to continue to hone the craft. And I'm relatively new to comics in regards to a lot of other veterans who've been doing it for a long time. And comics, like every other medium of writing, sort of has its own rules, and you've got to work through. Even though I've done a lot of television and film, I hadn't done a lot of comics, and so being able to hone the rhythm of words with art, and today's reader versus when I was heavy into comic books when I was younger. It's a completely generation. I'm writing to a YA audience. It's a lot of things that were different, but it was a challenge, and I was up to the challenge. And once I saw, they showed me some of the concept art that Selina had done early in, and it was intimidating because it was so good. It's like, okay, I've got to live up to this artist. And so when I started thinking about Quinn, I was just thinking about myself as a kid, and I don't want to step on any questions that you may have coming, but
Don't worry about it.
I thought about my insecurities as a kid. I thought about a lot of books that I enjoyed when I was a kid that didn't necessarily have characters of color in them. And I also thought about the limitations of having a superhero who only had one power. and was limited by the fact that we're not in a super violent story that we're telling. So it almost has to play like the Hardy Boys mysteries. He but he has this power that will get him out of a jam, or will, there's a limitation that's there that the Hardy Boys didn't have. So it was really more about story and finding adventures that Quinn was passionate about, things that he was, whether it was his community, whether it was about some social issue, whether it was something that was happening to a friend or someone that he cared about. He had to be emotionally connected to the thing in order for, in my imagination, for not only the reader to be connected to it, but to have something that was as interesting as his ability to be invulnerable, so that there was an engaging story that was kind of walking with, and at some point he's going to get run over by a car and be okay, or fall off a building, or something bad is going to happen to this kid. And it was funny because other writers who were fans of the book started to write suggestions into me of creative ways that I can test his invulnerability. Um, and it's just it's an honor to be able to sort of harken back to my childhood, for lack of a better place, and speak to youth and speak to innocence, and speak to a lot of things and themes that I don't think we have in the world right now, or at least enough of.
I think that's a great place to start. I think that you're, introducing one of the most important things that I enjoyed about Quinn, and that we mentioned earlier, which is that there's an inability for him to recognize just how special his gift is. And that, goes so well with other insecurities that he has about who he is, the environment he's in, his relationship to it, and what he would like to do compared to what he believes he can actually do.
So yes, Quinn inhabits a universe of superheroes that's already established. It's been long established before Quinn is a relatively new kid in this universe, and Quinn's story is primarily contained within the community and space that he inhabits. So not really a lot of the grandiose world-ending problems, sort of, that he encounters. It's pretty contained, but you do get to see this universe peripherally through Quinn's eyes. You sort of learn about how he is able to integrate himself with the greater superhero universe of his story as he does it. So you and Quinn are, as you read, you learn about it as he does, which is great because I feel like that makes the immersion a little more sympathetic for the reader, because Quinn, if you're into superhero comic books and you're into superheroes and that genre, you'll see yourself in Quinn. He's just a kid. He thinks it's cool when a guy can fly and a girl can shoot lasers out of her hands. So if you find that cool, you're in the same boat as Quinn, essentially. I believe there's a scene in this volume. I'm not sure what issue anymore. It's been a while, but there's a scene that encapsulates this, like, oh my god, a superhero in real life. I think how Quinn was portrayed was how anybody would react in that situation. So I'm excited for everyone to see it too.
That's an interesting predicament because it's one that I remember when I was a kid, people would ask me, "Hey, you play sports?" And I was like, "Yeah, I play soccer." And they're like, "What else you play?" I was like, "That's it." I could go on the playground with my friends and play other sports, but the thing that I cared about, that was my one thing. And unless it was connected to it or in some way it was in that sort of field of vision, I couldn't see beyond that. I had no recognition in my mind that running on a soccer field could equate to a track or other experience, or that maybe I could explore more. But I do know that my own insecurities kept me aware of the fact that this is what I thought I was, and based on what I thought I was, that was the most I was willing to explore or try or risk or even challenge.
Well, we share that in common because, when we were talking earlier about height, there was a natural like belief that I should be playing basketball. And I liked the game. I enjoyed watching it on TV, and I enjoyed playing it like you would play on the playground. But I had a lot of friends who they were committed to the game. Like if it was snowing, they would shovel the playground to play, and they were like deeply committed to this game. I was deeply committed to comic books. You know, I was deeply committed to horror films, and those. I'm old enough to where they used to have these monster sets where you could make Frankenstein or Dracula and paint them
Oh yeah,
and do
I
different things.
remember.
Aurora, I think, was the company that made them. And I had the Star Trek, the Enterprise, and different iterations of it, and Klingons and stuff. I was that kid. And I had friends laughing at me because I'd be out on my step at 13, 14 years old with Evil Knievel trying to make them flip perfectly with his motorcycle. So I wasn't the prototypical 6'8" kid who just loved sports, who was doing this thing. I liked it, like them, but didn't love them to the point where I wasn't going to read a big stack of comic books. If you gave me an option between one or the other, the comic books were always going to win. And so I think, in coming back to Quinn with that, he loves superheroes as well, and he dreams of being one. And like you said before, he gets a power, but his power doesn't kind of vibe with his imagination of what he thinks a superhero should be. Superheroes fly, they do this, they do that. They're almost like rock stars. And for him, he just doesn't get hurt. And it makes, I think I put in the first story arc that it makes it easier to deal with bullies because they can beat him up and, he won't be hurt too bad. But it doesn't necessarily help him become more popular, or it doesn't help him become a better student, or be celebrated in the way that I think kids imagine being validated outside of themselves. But once he begins to validate himself within himself, and it's an intrinsic motivation that is starting to come out, he starts to feel stronger about himself. And once that connection is made, that self-worth is made through doing, and the confidence grows from actually doing something rather than wishing or dreaming about the thing, he gets better at it. And the power and his ability to wield it come closer. I don't know if it'll ever get to a place where it's ideal. He's just like James Bond, but indestructible. But as far as his ability to solve a case, or to figure out a problem, I think he'll get better and better as he gets better, as he evolves as a person.
So Quinn is most assuredly a better person than I am. His capacity for empathy and his desire to be generally helpful and to insert himself into situations to that so that he can help far outstrips mine. I personally I enjoy darker stories and perhaps protagonists who are a little more morally gray, so to speak. But I enjoy working on Quinn because sometimes it's just nice to have an uncomplicated character who's just he's a good guy. He does good things. He just wants to help everyone and their dog. And it's nice to have nice feelings sometimes. So it's very enjoyable to work on his story. But I'm sure Rodney would be able to give you a better idea for how his character developed from inception to how he is portrayed now in the comics.
He had an aptitude prior to gaining his ability. In fact, it's before we even know that he's indestructible. What we know is that he has this sense of protecting his family, and he wants to design a home security system, which I might have tried to get some rubber bands and some sharp objects, or maybe like pull some stuff together in my mind, or dig a hole in the ground and hope someone falls in it. But I never had that sort of
Yes.
ability to apply, his knowledge. So I love that he comes into this with an intellect before he gains any ability. And
Yes.
that's actually, I think, an additional superpower he seems to at times overlook.
And to what you said too, it's intellect, but it's also a desire to do something with it that's altruistic, that's good. It's like he has a desire to help and protect and to make sure his family's okay. And those the character stuff is already there. It's just adding one more element to it that takes him slightly beyond where his friends and contemporaries are. And I think being able to empathize with Quinn and what he wants really is what idealistically I think we all aspire to as people, is just to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be.
I agree. What I love about Quinn is how, and thank you for taking the time with each of these answers, man. I'm loving everything
No,
you're saying.
it's all good.
It's totally like I'm loving it because I'm like, okay, that's close to what I was saying, but so perfectly different that it's just from another perspective that allows me to see it just as if I'm looking around the corner, or if I just tell my head the right way. And one of the things that also caught me about Quinn is he's got this genuine quality to him. He's got that desire that you mentioned. He's got an earnest uh, approach to a lot of what he's trying to do. And what struck me the most is that was something I loved in a character, Billy Batson, who was the Shazam.
Shazam,
And
yes.
and recently, when they rewrote him for part of the what was the New 52, Billy went from being the sweet orphan who was just a good kid to being a little darker, a little nastier, a little bit angrier. And
One
I
of my favorite.
understood. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off, but you
You're
hit a
fine, man.
thing. There's a book. One of my favorite books is Salem's Lot, Stephen King Salem's Lot.
Mm,
And when they did the TV miniseries way back when, I think in the late 70s or early 80s, it was just an innocent kid. And when they did the TNT remake, not too long ago, I think in the early 2000s, they made the kid like bad. It was
okay.
like he didn't have that, what the quality you're talking about with Billy Batson, that innocence and purity. It's almost like they wanted like he was an edgy, that edgy character sort of spoke to today's lack of innocence. Um, and that edge was going to make him more interesting in some way. But that was all. It just hit me that what you were talking about.
No, that's perfect. You saw the timer probably pop up. Apparently, recently they've been cracking down on the recording with Zoom. So if we get cut off in any way, are you okay with us just
I'm okay.
restarting the
Yes,
call
I'm
and
okay.
popping
Yeah,
right back on? Okay,
I'm
we'll get
fine.
that
Yeah,
edited
yeah,
down.
yeah.
Yeah. So what I loved is that you didn't take that direction. That for me, I felt that Quinn was this great character who didn't have to be. I mean, essentially, everyone deals with their insecurities in their own way. We all
Mhm.
have ways of coping. We develop them at a relatively young age. And I understood that for the writer who wanted to make Billy a nasty version of Billy Batson, that this was what they felt was another direction of coping that a young orphan might take, and that this was an opportunity to show how this kind of character could still become a hero. And that's don't get me wrong, as far as like exploring story, I understand that approach. But what I loved was that wasn't the necessity in telling the story of Quinn, that you could tell the story of Quinn and also allow him to maintain that all those wonderful qualities that I enjoyed because I see them sometimes in kids with their parents, my nephew. I'll enjoy that fact. And I wonder, wow, are they going to keep it? Will there ever be a point when they lose that? Because some kids, you'll see them at 17, 18, and you think to yourself, wow, they've still got all of those great qualities I remember from when they were younger. Something didn't change them. They didn't have to lose that in order to cope with any
But
insecurities they might feel, or something along those lines.
for me, it was about because I'm a parent, and I
Mm,
love the relationship that I have with my children. Um, I look at Quinn as a reflection of his parents in that relationship. That because they love him in a very specific way, um, it's still discipline, it's still being a parent, it's all of those things, but it's gentle enough and it's empathetic enough that it feels like it makes the person that's receiving it, even if it's a child, want to be a better person because that's what they're receiving. It's like the love is so genuine and pure and gentle that within that gentleness is a degree of vulnerability that translates to a desire to cultivate character and to be a better person. So often, superheroes are born out of tragedy. They're born out of something bad happens, Uncle Ben dies, and I didn't stop the guy that was going past him, and now I feel like I have to do a thing, or my planet blew up and they sent me someplace else, or I was coming out of a theater and I saw my parents die and I'm angry now and I want to be vengeance. And I wanted to come from a different energy. I wanted to come from an energy to say that you don't necessarily need trauma in that specific way, that you can empathize or connect with other people hurting. And that empathy can come from home, and that empathy can come from a good place, and that you can use that as a connector to what other people are going through and wanting to be a positive contributor to the world. Um, I hadn't seen that a lot. And, writing a lot of television, those stories are mostly based on conflict, whether it's comedy, drama, whatever. Very rarely is it from a place that is pure and good. And so, and certainly with characters of color, it's always, when you talk about the hood and the drugs and the guns and, any movie that's about that area typically heightens, to some cases, lesser degree, it could be true or whatever, but it heightens that idea that there's this, it's always based on trauma. It's always based on something negative. And I wanted to say that everywhere, every place on earth that is difficult, there's still some goodness that's there. There are good people that are there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, traumatic in order to want to be good.
Mm. Now, I'm curious, this wasn't a question even I wrote down, but I'm listening and I'm thinking about what you've already told me. And I was wondering, because you were working on Marvel's Runaways and because you have worked on other projects, is this something that you had tried to do previously before getting the chance to work with Quinn, where you could have a character become someone, but not born of tragedy or misfortune or...
I mean, I think not so much the specific idea. I've always been attracted to the idea of writing to a YA audience. And
Mm.
within that, I wanted it to be something, again, going back to the Hardy Boys, the Hardy Boys didn't necessarily have guns pointed at them or drugs or, that type of stuff. They just had an adventure that they were going on. And, Scooby Doo had, you basically knew in the first act, you met the person that they were going to see in the end and pull the mask off. But it was still something that was innocent. There was some innocence that was there. So you're looking at just story. You're not necessarily getting into all of the noise around the story, which is often what you see with, stories that are told about, difficult circumstances. You have to add in all of those other elements. And I'm not saying those elements don't apply. Quinn runs into them, a couple of them, during the first story arc. But I didn't want it to be so heavy and so bogged down with a lot of that stuff, because there are a lot of folks that do that and they do it incredibly well. So if I'm going to try to do something that's a little bit different, allow Quinn to be happy, allow Quinn to smile, allow Quinn to have a good time with his parents, with his friends, the girl next door. There's a lot of things in there that I think aren't necessarily new, but I wanted to serve them up in such a way that they felt like there was still some innocence in the world, and there was still some things that were good, and while you're still having an adventure at the same time.
I'm curious because you mentioned, that you started out with comics, that, you enjoyed collecting and reading. I'm curious what your relationship was with comics beforehand, because I'm wondering then how it is that you were able to use any of those influences, inspirations for what you were working on. And I'm also curious about the, what it means to tell this story through comics, because I think there's a lot of importance there.
My pool of comics that I've read is actually very small, despite being in the industry that I am.
Well, my mother was a school teacher, and this was before the days of big computers like the one that's sitting in front of me right now. So when she did her lesson plan, she would go to the public library, and since it was just me and her, she would take me. And they used to have this area where they had the kid books, the Dr. Seuss and Curious George and all of that stuff. But under those books, And this raggedy cardboard box were comic books, and I knew exactly where they were, and I would immediately go there. The hell with the Cat in the Hat. I didn't care about Ping the Duck or none of them. I cared about my comic books, and it was gold in those boxes. And I would sit there all day and just read, and it felt so good. Um, Sometimes I didn't understand the stories. I mean, I'm like talking about being a little kid, um, and I haven't been little in a long time. And but the imagery, and when I did understand the story, was great. But Neil Adams was my favorite comic book artist of all time. And I didn't know this as a kid. I just knew I loved those covers and I loved the artwork. And it was something about that style that just jumped out to me. And I just loved it. And there was a period of time when it seemed like every DC cover, he was drawing damn near every DC cover. And I just loved it. And they were in this box. And so it just struck me. And he had a tone, the Denny O'Neil books, Batman and Green Lantern and all of that stuff. They had a tone that was adventure. It was like James Bond. It was like, they just did stuff that was different than the Adam West, Burt Ward Batman that I saw, the Bam Pow, that. It was like this other thing that just felt like adventure. And that just sort of, that got into me in a way that was like it infected me. I loved it. And that was where the love connection was made. And through the years, as comic books evolved, as I was growing up, it went from that to then the Frank Miller Daredevils and that kind of stuff. And then of course the Byrne Claremont X-Men run and that type of stuff. Then all of a sudden, Alan Moore punched me in the face with Swamp Thing, and something different happened. To this day, I will buy.
As for the other characters, Brittany, his close friend, we actually designed her fairly early on, the same time Quinn was being designed, because she was part of the friend group that was envisioned for him at the start of the concept of Quincredible, and she was initially a little more aggressive looking. No, aggressive is the wrong term. She was a very intense character initially, so her design reflected that. So she had edgier hairstyles, edgier clothes, but eventually she was made to be not no less intense, but she was a lot more cerebral. She was the thinking character of the duo of Quinn and Brittany. So she no less passionate, but her design reflected a little less gung ho, less I'll fight you with my own fists if I have to attitude. I hope it did. And the superhero who is introduced, who is Glow, had she had a lot of different designs that we made for pre-production. But she was definitely going to be a person of color, so I made different designs for. Maybe she was Indian, maybe she was Asian, Southeast Asian, maybe she was also black, and eventually, I don't really remember what we landed on specifically, but the hood she wears that was retained from her original designs was originally a shawl or a wrap that she could use. Like when she was off duty, she could just wrap it around herself, because her outfit is meant to be able to transition from, oh, I'm on duty as a hero and now I'm off duty as a civilian. So that was one design element we really retained. As for his family, I was lucky because when time came to design them, they also had pretty specific references. Terrence, his dad, is like a less muscular Idris Elba, except if actually he's gotten a little more muscular since then, because that's one of the things I like to draw, so that happens. And the tertiary characters, usually they're designed as they come out, which is not always great for me, but that's how it is.
Hit record again and go ahead and bring that book back up, man, because I have a lot of
Can you hear
friends.
me?
We talk about. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. I've gone ahead and hit record. Go ahead and put that Swamp Thing back up because I
All
have
right.
that was right when it was cutting out. And I have so many
Yes.
friends who we can talk for hours about that book right there.
So Saga of the Swamp Thing, I remember it's this weird thing that I have in life. I'm going to call it luck in some things, in some areas. In comic books, that I would say in that area. And books and literature in general. I remember as a kid, when I used to have those paperback spiral, like this comic book rack I have behind me, but they had paperback books on them, reaching up and getting Stephen King's Carrie. And that was another that started this other thing where to this day I'm buying these books from this guy and falling in love, and falling in love with, a particular thing. And Alan Moore hit me with Swamp Thing, Miracle Man, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and then introducing me to Neil Gaiman. And with Miracle Man, when he took over for Miracle Man, it just became, as a kid and an only child, comic books were like my friend, a friend that I could depend on that would always be there. And no matter how bad I felt, no matter how tough a period of time I was going through, to this day, comic books have been like, now it's more of collecting more so than reading because I don't have as much time, even though every Wednesday, like an addict, I will go and buy a stack of comic books and read three. And I've got like a whole box full of new books that I haven't read, not because I don't want to, but because life has a tendency to interrupt my goals of reading books. But there was just certain when comics became like literature, and there were certain books that just spoke to me in a very specific way. And what was lacking was, for me, characters of color who had the same level of how can I say this? Just the same level of layers to how stories were told. Um, if it was a character of color, his color became a part of the story, or certain pathologies in American society became part of the story. And, and again, I don't want to say that those things don't exist or that those characters shouldn't be interested in those things. But, Batman didn't have to worry about that stuff. Batman just had to worry about the Joker or Ra's al Ghul or whoever he was fighting at the time. And Daredevil had to deal with being blind and emotionally connecting to whatever he was dealing with in the world. And I wanted to when I started to write comics, I wanted to not ignore, because we do live in a world that's problematic, but I didn't want the problematic nature of the world to supersede fun, or to supersede imagination, or to, again, bog down a story so much that we're no longer enjoying ourselves, but we're sort of getting medicine about, my judgment of what the world should be or how people should be, or basically regurgitating what you can see on CNN, anytime you want to turn the TV on. And so, again, not saying that those things don't exist or not downplaying them, but sometimes being able to speak to that feeling that I had when I would read the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew mysteries, and just lose myself in a story that didn't necessarily reflect the reality of the world that I was in, but sort of fired my imagination to another place. I had a friend that used to say the largest nation is the imagination. And I would sort of, anytime I'm writing a book or books, I always try to take the reader in a place where they don't expect they're about to go. Not as a trick, not like, the M. Night Shyamalan movies where in the end it's going to be this twist and it's coming. Or Twilight Zone where the thing that you've been watching, something different is going to come in the end. Not like that, but more a narrative, stretching the narrative boundaries to a place where it's just, It's just not. It's a surprise as far as you didn't expect this character to go to that place.
I understand. I love that history. I love that breakdown. Comics for me were a great discovery. They were something that I didn't actually get the chance to experience, mostly because I grew up in a very religious house, and there was some negative attitudes from different uh, people in that community, in that church community, who felt that there were things that were too wrong about comics for anything to be right. But once I finally got the chance to get my hand on a couple books, it was like I was hooked. The first one was free. Actually, the first two, they were gifts from a friend of mine on my birthday in the eighth grade. And I remember from that moment on, it was like, okay, I've reread both of these books like 30, 40 times. How do I get more? And then he took me to his comic shop, and then they found one in my town, and a relationship was formed. But then high school girls,
Life.
money really
Yeah.
became the biggest problem for me for a long time. And it was always interesting to me that if I was in a bad place, if there was a relationship that wasn't working out, I knew I could get down to either the library or Barnes and Nobles, where they had those big couches and you could just go and find a stack of graphic novels, pull them off the shelf, and no one was going to bug me because everybody else was doing the same thing. And I remember even being in college in times where it was like, man, I'm down and I need something that just makes me feel better about what's going on. I'd find one of those places and I could just know exactly where that spot was, like you were saying. And I love that your story was, when you were so young that you just knew where that cardboard box was. You could beeline to it every time. And I love the examples you have. Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil, those are legendary names. Those are
Mhm.
creators who did imagine, who imagined wonderful things and then brought them to life. And then, following that trajectory, I think Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, I think his Watchmen, I mean, I was a DC fan, so the Killing Joke was always something that just struck a chord. And his mantra, I'm doing this to destroy the medium. Like I'm really just here to mess with you. Like I'm really pushing your buttons. And there was a brilliance to it. And then following up with Neil Gaiman. What I love is that you've brought me into an opportunity where I get a chance to ask a question that I was curious about when I was reading about this, when I was reading this story, and I want to connect them after I ask it. Are you familiar with the milestone line that was
Mhm.
DC's release in the
I
'90s?
am.
That series, that whole line exploded for me. I'll never forget bringing home my first issue of Hardware, and like looking at it, and there being a playing card, and reading the letter to the editor, or from the editor, that was like, don't leave that card in the plastic. You got to take that out and put it in the spokes of your bike, and you got to ride around your neighborhood. And there was a vibrancy and a wonder. It was such a disappointment when we had that for a little while in comics and then it was gone. But I remember just this great opportunity. And when I was reading about the elements, because you introduce a whole community of superheroes through Quinn. He's our sort of like,
Mhm.
he's our guide. He introduces us to his community. And you set the story in New Orleans. You set it fully aware of the fact that Katrina is not a distant memory, that it's very recent, that the impact is still being felt. But then there's also something else that's occurred known as the event. And that was always something that I loved about the concept behind Milestone. You've got Dakota City. You've got something that happens that no one can really describe and is part of the key mystery about why all these super powered enhanced beings, as they're called in Quincredible, suddenly arrive, and what it means, because not all of them were good before they got powers. And even those who were are navigating a world where things are changing. New people are arriving all the time. And I love that you're nodding like, yeah, I know about Milestone. And I was just curious if there was any echoes, resonance, any connection to the fact that both are telling the stories about an event that's affecting the community and the people that are coming out of it.
The Milestone line of comics, I am not familiar with it, unfortunately.
Well, the Lion Forge folks already had the event in their books. That was the foundation, I think, of the entire Catalyst Prime universe. Was that event for virtually all of their heroes? But I wanted to use it in a very specific way, that it wasn't just about the heroes, but it was also about trauma to the community.
Okay, so the timeline. I won't lie, I'm very much embroiled in the production side of things. It takes a while to produce comics, so that's that's basically my day to day. I get up, do some chores, and then I work on the comic for the rest of the day. So I'm very focused on every panel, every page. That usually the depth of my knowledge of the story is goes about as far as which page I'm on, and the previous pages that I've finished are lost. The story is lost to me. I do know that there was an event, and then he got his powers, and then the rest of the series takes off from there. That it's terrible, but that's what I can tell you with certainty. I'm sure Rodney could give you a better idea of the timeline. I'm so sorry.
So connecting it to Katrina made it to me feel more real and not so superhero-y, for lack of a better word, that on an emotional level it affected the regular folk who weren't part of the superhero pantheon. That you know, at every level, folks were affected. Um, because I've got this hero that sort of straddles both worlds. He's more, he's less superhero than he is kid. You know, he's more regular kid than, you know, the invulnerable parts are sort of like, you know, I've always likened it to date myself even more. Kind of like Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno and the Incredible Hulk. You knew 2 to 2.5 times Bill Bixby's eyes were going to turn and he was going to turn into the Hulk on the TV show. It's like the $6 Million Man, to date myself even further. You knew he was going to do a bionic thing at some point, whether it was jump and he was going to look, or he was going to do a thing. That's sort of how Quincredible works. At some point, you're going to see the invulnerable stuff and it's going to come when the action comes. But the stuff that's human still needs to be connected to something that matters. So his actual origin, you know, the idea of who he is connected to a traumatic event for a lot of people. It destroyed the community. After Katrina destroyed the community, and they had to rebuild, and you know his parents had to rebuild along along with everybody else. And so it's another way of sort of galvanizing the idea of community. So from that trauma, Quinn emotionally connects to it in such a way that's saying, these people have been through so much. We've all been through so much. So when something bad enters, a bad guy, an antagonist comes into the on the scene, um, he's there to care a little bit more so because he remembers the trauma that everybody faced not too long ago.
Hmm.
So it was more of connecting the event to his humanity and psychology than it was to necessarily just the hero part of it.
I understand. I just loved when I was reading that, and suddenly, I mean, recently DC's announced they're bringing back Milestone, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of excitement to be had. There's a lot of characters I want to experience again, and pulled out some old issues recently, and just sort of like thumbed through and just sort of chuckled to myself, like, man. Because the other thing that unless you own those books, you didn't know, but there was a whole unique color process that was going on at that time. It changed the way things looked. It changed the texture of the paper. It seemed like an area of exploration. So there was a lot of excitement involved with that as well. And when I was thinking about, when I was reading through this and thinking about the event, why is this triggering something for me? It's something, oh, right. And Milestone, and my brain just sort of lit on fire. So thank you. Because now I can sort of just quiet that part of my brain that's
There you
been
go.
bugging me. Like, you got to ask that question, man. You
Yeah.
got to, because I even put it in my question. I'm like, hey, is this close? Am I like even close to to what's going on here? But I love this universe because I do. Now I'm going to date myself for just a minute as well. I remember the $6 Million Man. I remember Incredible Hulk. Do you remember when Jerry O'Connell had a short-lived TV series called My Secret Identity?
I remember it. I don't remember it enough to be able to talk about it like the other ones, but I do remember it. I remember the idea of it.
The concept is simply that he only has one power, and that is that he can't be hurt. And he's just sort of this kind of, you know, haphazard kid who just can't really do much very well. And on top of it, he's trying to do something, you know, remarkable. And yet, really, his big claim to fame is he doesn't seem to get injured in any way that's substantial. And I was caught for a minute by that because I remember thinking, there was an absurdity to what's this kid going to do with this ability. And I feel with Quinn, he expresses that idea like, okay, so I can just get beat up, and this way the bullies can do it and they don't get in as much trouble because it's not like I'm hospitalized or they're going to be put in, locked up for, damaging a human body in some horrible way. But then how do I do anything more than be a punching bag? And what I love is that's one of our first introductions to a hero who suggests just to Quinn, what are you not considering? And why are you only looking at your limitations instead of
You're
all
on
that you
point.
have to offer?
Your thinking is right in tune with mine. You're in a good place right now. That's exactly what I was thinking as I was putting this whole thing together.
Really?
Yeah.
What I love then too is that you exemplify that through the characters, because later Quinn sees that there's things that he can do that allow him to be more than some of those other heroes. He can take the punishment that they can't. The weapons they're facing are dangerous, to say the least. And suddenly he has an edge that the rest of the heroes no longer, basically he's equalized himself, and he has to start recognizing that comparison that he's been making and the reality of what he's actually capable of when he uses what he has and looks beyond those.
Exactly. I mean, I think, again, it goes back to that thing of becoming a hero. The parts I saw of the first iteration of Quinn, he was a lot closer to, let's say, Miles Morales. It's like he was a parkour expert and he could jump around and do a bunch of things. And you didn't have as much of the emotional stuff as what I do. It was just more of him being a traditional superhero. And nothing wrong with that at all. But it was just more of, for me, there was this great opportunity in this void where I think when people say the word superhero, it's one of the reasons why I don't write a lot of them. It's because I'm always looking to find where's the emotional center and what's the thing beyond the thing that's launching the character into adventures. It's like you have some characters who have an origin, and they have that origin and they're basically replaying that same emotion over and over and over and over and over again. And they're rebooted, but it's still rebooted by that same incident or that same thing. And I wanted Quinn to be able to have multiple emotional entry points as to why he does the things that he does. As a writer, to be able to expand and tell different types of stories. I think with in each of the story arcs, the ones to come that I don't think they probably want me to talk about, but I try to go to a different place with each one of them that still speaks to, there's the familiarity of Quinn. He's going to react in the way that you believe that he would as the human being that he is. But it's all motivated from a different place. It could be friendship. It could be from his parents. It could be from the community. It could be from history. It could be, just a good old fashioned adventure, but it's still under that good old fashioned adventure, something that he's emotionally connected to. And I wanted to create a framework that sort of didn't have to continuously regurgitate the same idea. It's like when you were talking about Billy Batson and Shazam. I can understand why, if you gave me an opportunity to do that story, I'd have that same instinct too, to say, how could I do it differently? What could I do different? What have they not done yet? Right. That's always what you're looking for. I think with Miracle Man, and being able to draw the parallel between Miracle Man and Shazam, I think what you were saying about Alan Moore, destroying that idea of what a character like that would really do, in quotes. And it's funny because at a certain point, there are a lot less Miracle Man stories than they are Billy Batson and Shazam, Captain Marvel stories. But, I just wanted to make something that had legs. I just wanted to make something that felt like you could pick it up. When you look at James Bond, when you look at like I said, the Hardy Boy, Nancy Drew mysteries, you could still make those stories today. You could still tell those stories today. You would have to update some of the ways, the pacing, the different things you'd have to do to reflect today's kid, that has electronics and doesn't necessarily go outside as much as we did when we were kids. But they still have enough legs that you can do interesting things with them. And I wanted Quinn to have that kind of foundation as well.
Me and Rodney got involved with each other. If I remember correctly, it's been a while. I was already working on pre-production for Quincredible before Rodney and I were introduced and the team of Quincredible was officially put together. So what I was working on at the time was designing Quinn himself and any of the characters we thought were going to be very important recurring characters like Brittany, his close friend, and his parents, and another superhero who comes out in the volume and is introduced there. We were doing things like trying to nail what he looked like, trying to know what haircut he would have, what his superhero outfit would look like, which he never wears, and how many shoes he can own, and how many times I can change his shoes throughout the series, while I presume Rodney was working on the script. And eventually, when he finished that script, we were introduced, and then production started in earnest. Bringing Quinn to life on the page. It was fairly straightforward on my end because, again, a lot of the heavy lifting, like, it was done by the writers, by Rodney, and the editors. So they were, I assume they went back and forth and trying to decide what the concept of Quinn was. So when it got to me, they had a fairly specific idea of what they wanted. When I came around, Quinn was going to be just a young black kid with an earnest heart and a good head on his shoulders. And so we tried to really reflect that in the way he's designed. And we also tried to keep him realistic to what he was. So, he's a kid in high school. He's not jacked. He's not super handsome or anything. He's just a kid who can run and sometimes do flips. His design direction was really more flight than fight, and he was really more brains over brawn. So we tried to reflect that in him. And I think I turned out more than a dozen hairstyles for him before we landed on what he has now. And actually, one aspect that I wish I really retained from pre-production was the style of streetwear we gave him, because not a very fashionable person. I don't really run in those spheres, and I know that New Orleans and that demographic of that Quinn is in probably wears more interesting clothes than I do or I did at the time when I was a teenager. And his pre-production street clothes really reflected that. It was a lot more interesting, a lot more quirky. I don't know why I shied away from it when we finally did production. But that's how it ended up going. But I did make sure to give him different shoes all the time, because weirdly that was a design note that he never wears the same pair of shoes, which is interesting for the character, not so great for me because I own like 2 pairs of shoes, and sometimes that's all I have for reference.
Well, I think you've created that so well because you've made Quinn so invested in his community. And because of that, that actually means that there's going to be different motivations for him to act. Whether it's the girl that he likes, who, as is always the case, ends up with the guy that no one can believe and thinks that, well, this is cute and fun, and you're just not what's happening right now.
Right.
But you also have, other stories that can be great motivation. His parents, who I think are really beautiful examples of loving parents. You have this gorgeous exchange where they're talking about, just for a moment. I mean, it's like, I feel like it could have taken place over a couple of pages, but you do it so well in just a page or two. It might even be only one. I have to look back now. But where they're talking about, like, what do we have now? We've got this kid who's kind of indestructible, but we don't know how long it's going to last. What sort of dangers this could create for him now? How can we be parents? How can we support him, and do all the things he needs when we don't even know, what that might look like in the future? And when that sort of relationship, that care is put at risk, it motivates Quinn. But he's also got community leaders he looks up to. So all of these different places are reasons why he's going to act, and they're also going to be motivators for how he's going to act. And I was curious if you could unpack a couple of those for us, just to.
Well, to what you just said about the parent thing, again, being a parent, I wanted his parents, what do his parents think about what he does outside of him? Every so often when you see this scenario take place where parents discover that their kid is capable of doing a thing, they want to control it because of their care of, how much they love their kid. There's still danger and he's still a kid. So how do you process the power dynamic of parent to child? And I think in this instance, the conversation that they have speaks to the limitations of what it means to be the parent of a kid who has this thing. It's like, do you have a bedtime now? What if you went to the dangerous part of the neighborhood? How can I tell you not to go over to that kid's house when, even if he's got a gun, you'll be okay? There's nothing that can happen at this point. What's my role? And as other stories going forward explore, the conversations between the parents become just that of what's my role now? And Quentin speaks to that later on as well too, of why I still need a parent. And just being able to, in most comics that have kids at the center, they're very straight down the middle. Either I'm hiding from my parents what I'm doing, or if my parents become aware, somehow they're kind of like the goofy parents that are still kind of tagging along behind me to make sure what happens. Well, speaking to what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about, this is a dangerous world. This isn't an innocent world per se, and we can't ignore that. So there's a fine line between how his parents feel about what he's doing, the reality of that, and his power. But and I wanted it to feel like it was a real conversation between real people thinking about a real thing in regards to their kid, because to me that reinforces uh, the stakes for what Quinn is going through. If his parents are going through that and they're thinking like adults, and it's a plausible conversation that they're having, and it's a heightened plausible conversation that they're having, then we're able to invest in all aspects of the fantastic stuff that comes along, because we've created a solid foundation for who this character is and where this character is trying to go. And the same thing with the community as well. I wanted there to be, again, usually you see in stories that talk about the inner city or impoverished neighborhoods or that type of thing. There are polar extremes. Somebody that's either all good or it's all bad. And I wanted to split the difference down the middle to say that in human beings, we all have goodness and badness in us. I've done things when I wasn't my best self that I'm really sorry about, and I've done things that I'm proud of myself about. And I try, as I evolve as a person, to do more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. And I think that exists in every facet of life. And with those community heroes, when you think about the Dr. Kings or the Malcolm X's or any of those people who we sort of, canonize and make a certain way, they had flaws as well as human beings. And so when we talk about the people in the community that Quinn looks to sort of sound like those people, it's not as easy as this is a perfect person that I admire. They're going to do a perfect thing. And I think for Quinn, we're still going through the process of learning to be a child, adolescent, and adult. We're still moving in that direction. So the more complicated layers as he's going through his adventure, he's also developing as a young man as well, and really realizing that there's a place for idealism, but there's also a place for practical thinking, and not everybody is either all good or all bad. That all of us have layers, and and more stuff going on than just the stuff that I need you to encounter in order to stay with my adventure. I'm trying to create a world that's walking alongside the world that we actually live in, and then adding some fantastic elements to it.
As for the other characters, Brittany, his close friend, we actually designed her fairly early on, the same time Quinn was being designed, because she was part of the friend group that was envisioned for him at the start of the concept of Quincredible, and she was initially a little more aggressive looking. No, aggressive is the wrong term. She was a very intense character initially, so her design reflected that. So a lot she had edgier hairstyles, edgier clothes, but eventually she was made to be not no less intense, but she was a lot more cerebral. She was the thinking character of the duo of Quinn and Brittany. So she no less passionate, but her design reflected a little less gung ho, less I'll fight you with my own fists if I have to attitude. I hope it did. And the superhero who is introduced, who is Glow, had she had a lot of different designs that we made for pre-production. But she was definitely going to be a person of color, so I made different designs for maybe she was Indian, maybe she was Asian, Southeast Asian, maybe she was also black, and eventually I don't really remember what we landed on specifically, but the hood she wears that was retained from her original designs was originally a shawl or a wrap that she could use. Like when she was off duty, she could just wrap it around herself, because her outfit is meant to be able to transition from, oh, I'm on duty as a hero and now I'm off duty as a civilian. So that was one design element we really retained. As for his family, I was lucky because when time came to design them, they also had pretty specific references. Terrence, his dad, is like a less muscular Idris Elba, except if actually he's gotten a little more muscular since then, because that's one of the things I like to draw, so that happens. And the tertiary characters, usually they're designed as they come out, which is not always great for me, but that's how it is.
Well, I think you're using some great elements within the storytelling to sort of not only show us that through the story development, but also through the visual that we get to enjoy through comics. So one of the things that stuck with me is right now when you were talking about how he's going to learn how to do things, it's going to take practice. And you have a great scene where he's trying parkour and he's giving it a shot and he thinks he has a strategy. But like everything, we all have the best laid plans until actually things hit the ground running, or as the saying is, until the first shot's fired, the first punch is thrown, and then reality sets in. And he sort of recognizes the fact that this attempt that we get to experience of him in parkour isn't bad, but it's not great. And prior to, he'd had a moment or two where he could use some parkour skills to get himself out of trouble. But now, when he's actually trying to do something and thought and planning, it doesn't work out the way he wants. And like many of his adventures later, he's going to have to either try something and fail or learn how to read a scenario to try and figure out the best way to deal with it, because there will be options and opportunities, but only so many are going to lead to the result he's looking for. But then also, what I feel is great is that he's dealing with both things that are going to affect not only those closest to him in age, but those he looks up to. And you do this great connection with the idea of the frustration that can occur in the community. You start with his encounter with those around his age who he has a conflict with, and he realizes that the results of him doing something heroic is actually them being incarcerated, which he's now is like, okay, well, how am I helping the problem? But he recognizes at some point later when talking with the other heroes, what they're doing is born out of frustration, and that's what we need to address. But then later you take that
Mhm.
same idea of frustration and you put it on a community leader who's trying to do the right thing, who wants to be the best example. And even even that person, even those people, even those who are trying to lead are going to get frustrated. They're going to feel that the ways that they're trying to lead haven't worked out, that a lifetime of doing the best things has not given them the results, and frustration for anyone is eventually going to lead to a breaking point.
And a lot of that, comes from a lot of the stuff that you see on television right now, Black Lives Matter and the protests and all of that. My entire life, I remember these conversations. When I was watching Phil Donahue, my grandmother was watching, and in the background, I'm listening, or again, dating myself. But I remember some of the same arguments, and it's funny because I'm watching this Lincoln documentary on CNN and they're talking about Lincoln, and a lot of the stuff that he was talking about, the debates that they were having, feel eerily reminiscent of the stuff that we're going through right now. And after generation and generation of trying to solve some of these problems, the problem of poverty in America, which never really has been dealt with, the problem of race in this society, which is still problematic, and other issues, the divide, the loss of a middle class, and all of that kind of stuff. It's frustrating over time, and I think oftentimes when it comes to stories for young folks, we kind of paint a very easy solution. There's an easy way that we can deal with this, and like you could just catch the bad guy and put him in jail, and you're okay until he gets out. And I don't think that's the way the world works. The world has you do the best you can and you make incremental growth in a positive direction. And sometimes you take a step back, but that doesn't mean that you don't keep fighting to make a better day. And I wanted that to kind of be in there too, that the heroes aren't always perfect people, and that problems aren't always solved at the end of the hour, at the end of the issue, or the end of the story arc. We may gain some semblance of things being better, but there's always something that we're going to have to battle. And the commitment, if you decide that you're going to be the good guy, is to understand that there's never going to be an ideal. There's never going to be a place where there's no conflict, and that my responsibilities have been sort of, I'm absolved of any responsibility. Um, so just those themes and those ideas, and trying to layer them into the subtext of what's going on in Quinn's world, um, as much as the practical narrative that's going forward.
Mm. I loved everything about this book, man. I just want to say
Thank you.
thank you
Thank you.
for telling a great story, an original story, one that felt fresh and new, and did so much of what you were describing, which is to take the story in a direction that isn't what's already been done, that isn't part of the expected. And because of that, there are so many authentic moments that I absolutely treasured. I would encourage anyone to consider that when they get the chance to read it. And I'd love to hear their thoughts as well, because it was something that it's like striking a bell or like striking, just with that perfect tone. You just hear it afterwards and you can't stop hearing it. I can't stop seeing the pictures and reading the words and remembering them as I'm talking with you right now. It was really a wonderful time.
Thank you very much. I hope going forward we're able to continue on in the same tradition. I know certainly, as a writer yourself, you get to a place where you feel this responsibility, not just to tell the best story that you can tell, but the protagonist stuff that's inside of you that wants to try to not necessarily just make the world a better place, but to do something that's positive, that's good, that resonates. The same way we were talking about Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil and the stuff that the way Alan Moore affected us. My hope is that the wonderful things that you've said about Quinn, that resonates for kids, young people, anyone who's reading the book, but primarily young folks who feel like they have someone that is reflective of the world that they live in.
I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. I'm looking forward to anyone who's going to come in, because I have a feeling that they're going to be echoing a lot of what I was describing, and I'm
I
looking
hope
forward
so.
to you experiencing that. I also know that you suggested possibly that those who could be listening and arrange for me to actually get in contact with you might not love it if you suggested what future stories might be out there for Quinn, or
Yes,
if
yes.
there is any way that we can address that without getting you in trouble, and b also maybe sort of suggesting that there is more for Quinn to take on. His story, as you described with almost all heroes, this is, as it's been put, a never-ending battle. Once you join the fight, once you decide to commit, there is no ideal, which means you'll never stop doing it. But just because this book comes to a close doesn't mean that Quinn's story is ending. What else does he have to experience, challenge? What's coming his way
Well,
that we can
there's a second
suggest?
story arc that's coming out in July. I think they've already sort of listed it out there. That's actually done. And if you want to see that artwork again, Selina's great artwork. Um,
I don't
this
think
is
we had the recording going before, so yeah, let's
okay.
put that up
This
because
is
that's
the great
gorgeous.
cover. I don't know if you can see it,
I
but
can.
okay, the hands touching Quinn.
Yeah.
Um, it speaks to we get into a little bit of authentic New Orleans history, and another connector to the community in a way. But I think it speaks to Quinn's evolution as a person and as a superhero and as a character overall. He begins to kind of he to get a little confidence, a little wind under his sails, and we expand his world a little bit. Um, I think, along with whoever the antagonist is that he's battling, that antagonist has to reflect the evolution of Quinn. Like, for example, if we were talking about Batman, the Joker is sort of, the big bad to the Batman. He reflects him perfectly. But along that ladder, getting to Joker, you've got the Riddler and Clayface and a bunch of other bad guys who are great bad guys, but they're not the Joker.
Right.
They're not the Joker. So
Like they say, when bad guys want to scare themselves, they tell Joker stories.
exactly, yeah. So it's like, the Joker's bad enough. The polar opposite of who Batman is. Now all of those other guys are great. Bane can break your back, and all of that stuff. But that's sort of the journey and the path that Quinn is on. And I always wanted the whoever the antagonist is, the tests continue to get the trial gets harder and harder and harder. He has to pour more stuff out of himself. And the bonds of testing, his family bonds and his friendships and his relationships, they get tested more and more and more, so that a deeper sense of the principles that are around the character can begin to sort of bleed through, and we can learn more about Quinn and become more, hopefully, emotionally connected to him and what he wants, because he's being pushed further. We're starting at a place of bullies in the neighborhood. We're starting at a place of, do I belong? Um, those types of things. Now that I've decided I do belong, um, what happens once I get in and now I'm tested to a place where I'm pushed to the brink? Do I want to quit? This was harder than the last time. I remember when we played basketball in high school, there were games against some teams we knew we were going to win. And just because of the nature of the school that we were playing just didn't have those players. And then there would be like city teams that we would play that were terrifying, that we knew where we were that to them, and
Right.
we knew that we were probably walking out with a loss. Do you quit playing the game? Do you quit trying? Do you quit giving your best effort because you're playing against insurmountable odds? So I think the thing for me is to continuously turn heat up and on Quinn, and see whether or not he can take it. And I think in the second story arc and the third story arc, there's a simple math of his emotional development meeting the thing that he does, the action, the verb of the story, and then the psychological / emotional development of Quinn as a character and a person. You can't move those things so much so that through every arc he's a completely different person, but incrementally, if you get to a place where you see his growth, and that's still reflective of the world, that the demo for the primary demo for who this book is intended for. That's sort of the goal, to find something different every time. And it's nerve wracking when you're sitting in this chair of, okay, what can I do differently? It's funny, there's another book that I write, Philadelphia, and it's a mature book. Kids don't read that book.
Don't read it.
And
I'm familiar with what you're talking about, kids.
thank you. Yeah, don't read that, kids.
Yeah.
I'm just making an example of a thing right now. And the artists on that book, Jason Sean Alexander, we're just entering into the third arc of that book. And he just posted something on Twitter where he said he firmly believed that, where can we go now? We've had 2 good story arcs. There's no way this third one could be good. And hopefully the fans will be forgiving for what we're about to this meal we're about to serve them. Unfortunately, when he read the story for the third arc, he was very pleased. And I sort of feel that way about Quinn. It's like, okay, I did a neighborhood story, the second arc of story, I did that story. Okay, where do I go next? Because it's not just so much where you go, it's how does where you're going affect Quinn and evolve the character a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, just incrementally, because you don't want to make the jump so big that now he's a different person, but enough to where I see some growth, I see something that's different, and you're not just regurgitating the same idea again and again and again. So it's a challenge, but to where we started, that challenge hopefully makes me a better writer. And it makes Quinn a more interesting character. And yeah, that's always the goal. I mean, I don't think anybody writes comics to get rich. So for me, it's the love that we talked about earlier with that box with my mother in the public library, and wanting to contribute to that so that maybe one day a couple of guys are on a Zoom call like this right now talking about Quinn and saying, man, I love that book, and my kid loves that book, and blah, blah, blah. That's enough for me.
I always loved the idea that was expressed when I was going through writing classes or workshops. There would be that teacher that would remind why it was we're even doing this. And for so much of it, it's about what got us into it. But then it's about, why at some point do you continue? And someone at some point with writing inspired us to pick up the pen, sit down at the keyboard. And at some point, we want to, in ourselves, write something that says, I heard you. I was listening. And this is what your writing did for me, and this is what I want my writing to do now in response to that. Not only to what you guys showed me and taught me, to all the men and women who did things with writing that now we want to experience.
When the comics community, I love the fans and I love the people who read the book, but when other writers and other creatives, not only praise your work, but they get into it too. It makes you feel like you are part of a pantheon of creatives that, that we're in this big club because we all emotionally and psychologically have this thing that we can relate to in regards to how difficult this can be, how lonely this can be, how the process of going into a room and hopefully opening up a vein and pouring it on the page, and without any guarantee of how it's going to be received. It takes a little bit of courage to be able to do that again and again and again and again and again. But that's sort of what this is. And, to me, it's a metaphor for Quinn's development as well. That the better he gets, the stronger he gets, even in the face of sometimes failing, he still gets up and he tries again. And I think for those people who decide, my therapist said to me once that, everybody's flawed, but there are 2 types of people that walk with that. There's the one group of folks who sort of define their flaws, and that's an aspect of how they see themselves as their flaw. They defend it. And then there are the people who understand that they're flawed and they're working on being better people. They're working to walk with their flaw and not necessarily allow it to define them. I purposefully put Quinn in that position to where he's got to overcome his fears. He's aware that he's afraid, but he still faces the danger nonetheless. Oftentimes with heroes, they don't admit that they're afraid. They don't admit that their insecurities. They just go into the fight and they just keep fighting. And to
Daredevil, the
me,
man without fear.
yeah, exactly, the man without fear. And so that's great. And I think certainly for that period of time when we were going through the process of those heroes and coming through the 60s and the 70s, that was perfectly fine. But I think when we get into how stories are told now and sort of those stories being reflective of sort of almost even advertisements for movies and TV shows, there's a different type of storytelling that's a little bit more grounded, less fantastical. Certainly the way the Marvel universe manifests itself, to where it walks right along with real life. I think it's the perfect setting for telling stories that are a little bit more emotional, a little bit more grounded, a little bit more connected to the trials and tribulations as people that we go through.
Well, I'm also going to point out that I think that the recognition you're already getting, Comics Beat saying it's a well-rounded work, complex characterizations, a good story that understands these aspects aren't separate from the political and social ones, but intertwined. And from Black Nerd Problem saying the creative team has poured their heart and soul, which I think answers the question about the idea of, pouring the blood on the page and how much of that you're giving that others are recognizing. So I think the early response is great. I'm looking forward to hearing from others. And I love the fact that there's a great history that you're, connecting with, not only from your own experiences, from your own comic book experiences, but also from your own understanding of these characters. I'm a little, just wondering what this conversation would have been like if we could have kept Selina in and I encouraged whatever processes it took for her to bring her on the page. Yeah. I'm going to hopefully follow up with her, and if I can blend these two together in some way. If not, it might be a two-parter. But man, Rodney, so when we started, this is what I was saying I absolutely love. I get the chance to talk with another writer. I get the chance to listen to an artist describe their process. I get to ask the questions that anybody else who's reading might have asked, but now they've already got the answers. And when they go in to read this book, they can either listen before and read it or listen afterwards and gain those insights. And also, hopefully, with what you suggested, we can look forward to who is it Quinn's going to grow into next? What part of his personalities and what challenges are you going to face that are going to allow him to experience that incremental growth we're all trying to achieve in ourselves? And also that he's going to need, because you pointed out at the beginning, the idea of the balance that allows him to become better with his powers, the control and the understanding that is part of his maturity and improvement that's going to also make him a better superhero. It sounds like he's going to be tested and challenged in all the ways he needs to grow and become more. And I think you've set us up well for a lot of expectation come this summer, and and the stories are going to follow. Here's my last sort of thing that I always like to consider is that I'm never as smart as I think I am. Just like, when I'm a teenager and I think I'm getting away with something, I'm never as cute as I think I am. I'm always actually, making a mistake. And I'm well aware of the fact that in any conversation, there's a question I wanted to ask and I didn't, or that someone who's getting interviewed to talk about their process is like, man, if they ask this question, I've got the answer, I'm ready. And I always want to consider, if I didn't get that question, if I didn't ask you that question, and there's something you would love for me and anyone else to know about this story, about what you were doing with it, or anything else I could have asked that you were like, man, I've had this answer ready. If just someone would ask me the question. And I'd love to consider that I didn't ask that question.
No questions. Just hi guys. Just enjoy the story. Right? Like I said, it's nice to have nice feelings sometimes, especially nowadays. And I believe that Quinn and Quincredible have something good to say with regards to the larger climate of life as it is now. And if nothing else, it's a nice story about a nice kid who just wants the best for everyone. And sometimes lasers come out of people. Thanks.
No, you pretty much covered everything. I mean,
Oh,
I
wow.
think I was more curious to what you're going to ask Selena because we never really get an opportunity to talk, because she's in the Philippines too, and the time difference and beyond just, how artists and writers work. I'd love to be able to gain some of her insights, and I loved where she was going when she was talking about how she got, the gig to come on and do Quinn and how she sees the world. I'm more really interested in that. I mean, I think you've done a fine job as far as what I do, trying to put this story together and create this world. But I'm really interested in her stuff.
So am I. I mean, I want to know how she took what you were offering up in the scripts and translated it. And I'm also curious about what elements she was considering or ideas went in her mind that she was in, as you described it, so able to capture, the atmosphere, the presence that New Orleans has, and how it is that someone who is living in the Philippines is able to tap into that just through your script and whatever understanding she might have brought too. So those are all questions I'm looking forward to asking, and I'm really hopeful that I figure out whatever technical difficulties need to be navigated, so her and I can have that conversation. And I'm going to make these fit together. I am nothing else if not resourceful or able to say, so this is what I wanted and this is what I got and this is what I'm here to offer. But
Might take a trip to the Philippines. You might have to go to the Philippines.
I went once and I might
Okay,
go
see, there
back.
you go.
Yeah,
There you go. There you
this could
go.
be the reason. Me and a mic and a backpack and
There you go. It's a beautiful, it's a
Rodney.
beautiful place. Yeah.
Hey, it really is. I would love to go back. Rodney, equally beautiful has been our conversation. I don't want to just follow up with you about Quincredible. If you have any other projects that you would love to sit down and talk shop with me about, whether it's something new launching, something coming to an end, or man, you've just got some writer stuff in your brain that you're like, hey Seth, I could fill up a lot of time if you just want to sit down and jam, because
That
this
may,
was a lot of fun.
likewise, that may come. It's a lot of stuff coming over the next few months. So you will probably hear me hitting you up, knocking on your door, say, hey man, remember you said you wanted to talk? Here we go.
I'm ready. Let's get it on the calendar. Let's have the next conversation. Rodney, if I can just say it again, man, thank you. This has been a great night. I'm going to go and do some writing, and I'm inspired because of our conversation, man.
Cool, brother. Likewise. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. You have a great evening.
All right. You take it easy.
All right. Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye now. And that brings us to the end of our conversation with Rodney Barnes, Selina Espiritu, and our main character and the world he inhabits. I'm talking about Quincredible, and I'm also talking about Bruno. He stuck around, he stayed through all the way, wanted to make sure he said goodbye, or at least let you know he was here without really feeling like he had to commit to something like saying goodbye. When it comes to Rodney and Selina, I have hope, faith, and plans to follow up with them about more stories regarding Quinn and all of the other characters and projects I know they are both working on. I loved everything they had to share with us. I laughed and really took to heart so much of what they said, and I can only imagine future conversations will be just as good, probably even better. That brings us to the end of this one. Please make sure, if you haven't yet, rate, subscribe, review, do all that fun stuff so I can keep bringing them back to you, and make sure that you tune in for our next episode. From me and Bruno, see you next time.